This is Hannah from Velvety Studio, and I'm going to show you how to make a very cute bunny draft excluder. The first thing to do is to print off the pattern and lay them out like so. You need to cut round the outside of each piece, but also bearing in mind that along the pink lines you need to attach one part to another, so that you get something that looks like this. So this is me trying to work out where to place the pieces to make the best use of the fabric, and I've included a fabric cutting plan to make this easier. As well as the grey fabric for the main part of the body, you also need to cut some inner ear pieces from the pink fabric, and for the toe beans and also for the nose, a white bunny tail ×2, and 2 pieces of foam so that the ears stand up and don't flop down. Cutting velvet can be a little trickier than cutting other types of fabric, as it has a nap. You can see me here showing you that these 2 pieces are well matched, and if you pull the top half over the top of the bottom half right sides together, that will be a good match, as you won't have one side of the body darker than the other. For all the parts of the body that need to be stuffed, I've marked on the pattern a stuff hole which you'll need to transfer to your fabric so that you know when to start and stop sewing, leaving enough space for turning the fabric from the wrong side out to the right side out, and also to get your hand in to make sure you could do a good job of the stuffing. I'm now going to move on to making the head. You're going to lay your template piece onto the head piece and mark where the eyes are going to go, how big the stitches are going to be, and where the eyelashes are going to sit. So this is 1 stitch completed, and I recommend you take lots of time over this because it will look really nice at the end. Moving on to the nose, you can use a fabric glue to secure the nose into place so it's easier to do your zigzag stitch to attach it to the face. The ears consist of 3 pieces each, an inner and outer piece of fabric and a piece of foam, and you're going to line them up like this and put right sides together on the inner and outer piece, and then add the foam onto the top. Now you're ready for pinning, so get your pins, pin it nicely together so all the pieces are in line, and get ready to sew. So once you've got your ear pieces pinned together, you're going to stitch round, leaving the bottom of the ear open, taking the pins out as you go round. Just take your time over this to make sure the curve is all nice and smooth as you go round. What you'll find is that the seam is a little bit bulky, so whilst I turned this ear immediately inside out, with hindsight I should have probably trimmed it off before I did. So you can see me coming around the end here, getting to the end. Don't forget, with each piece you construct, just make sure you reinforce those final few stitches by going back and forward on the sewing machine a few times. Take out the pins, and then I'm going to turn it inside out, but to save time you could trim it now. So when you're turning each of the pieces out, you'll find that sometimes the seams look a little bit jaggedy, so it's always good to have a knitting needle handy and just poke them out and make sure they're sitting properly before you carry on. So this is when I realised I needed to trim the seam because I still had a few jaggedy lines, so I then had to turn it inside out again and trim. Hold it in place securely and then pin across the centre, leaving enough space at the bottom for your stitches. So now under the machine we're going to run first line of stitches low, and then the next line of stitches a little higher up, just to make sure the ear doesn't come undone once it's attached to the face piece. So that's what it should look like at the end. There's marks on the pattern that you'll need to transfer to the front of the bunny face so that you know where to position the ears, so that there's enough of a gap between them to be able to pull the bunny from wrong side out to right side out. As you can see, the inner ears of the bunny are pointing towards the front of the face, so now it's time to get the back piece of the head and lay it down right sides together onto the ears and the face. This is it now, all layered up and pinned into place. I'm going to put it under the machine, but I do go slow on this one because it takes a long time to unpick if you go wrong, so it's well worth taking loads of time over this stage. And you can see me slow down, keep stopping, remove pins, making sure the fabric's lined up to everything to try and make this a really good seam with a really nice curve with no tucks or holes or anything like that. So I'm going super slow and stopping now and then to make sure everything's in line all the way around. Of all the stages in this process, I would say this is probably the most difficult, so just give yourself time and make sure you're prepared with all your pinning before you get going. So I'm on the nose now and I'm going to continue round. I'm doing a few centimetres at a time, just making sure everything's right. And when it gets to having to go over the ears, you can see here there's a massive load of bulk sitting in there, so you really have to kind of be quite forceful with your sewing machine. But I've left a hole at the top, and that's what it looks like at the end. So I've left the hole so that everything can be pushed out from the inside. Make sure you reinforce those final few stitches near the hole because this process can be quite tough on that bit of the seam. So go over it quite a few times and then it'll stand up to what I'm doing now. So this is the moment of truth, waiting for the bunny head to be turned the right way out, and I'm happy it's looking good. There's no holes. I do use a knitting needle and I poke round the inside with the knitting needle just to make sure the seams are pushed out. These don't need trimming we're using the fabric I've got here, but you may need to trim, it's up to you. So I'm just making sure all the seams are pressed out, and there he is, looking good. Finished bunny face with a hole at the top ready for stuffing. I decided I could still see jaggedy lines in that seam, so I've gone back in with my knitting needle and I'm going around everything. Nearly done, one more bit to do there. Smoothing everything out and he's done. Time to construct the back feet. Start with your fabric glue and position your bunny beans and your bunny bean pad into place so that it's a lot easier for you to do the zigzag stitch on your machine. So you're attaching the pink fabric to the grey, go around nice and slow so that you get nice lines and curves, and you will find that the beans are quite small, so you do have to go quite carefully around those. When you're positioning your stuff hole for the feet, it might be a good idea to follow the steps of this video slowly, because we always want the stuff holes to be on the underside of the back foot rather than at the top where they're more visible, which means you just have to make the hole at the top when you're constructing in the hope that when you turn it the right way out, the hole then ends up at the bottom. So follow these steps as I'm showing you and you shouldn't go wrong. So we're now placing right sides together, and so that I can see where the stuff hole is, I'm turning it over so I know when to start and stop my sewing. So sew around that edge now. Make your second bunny foot and you will find that they point to the left with the stuff hole at the bottom. Moving on to the front paws, to show where the toes are, I've used black wool. I'm going to mark off where the lines of wool start and stop, using a ruler to get a nice spacing between them. Tie a knot in your wool And start from the underside of the fabric and just keep going until you get to the end of the third, and then tie a knot to finish. Mark off the stuff hole on the wrong side of the fabric, and then when it's turned round, the hole will be on the underside where you can't see it. The tail's nice and easy. Cut 2 pieces of the white fabric and pin them together and mark off where the stuff hole is going to be, and then sew around the outside. Here are the back feet, the front paws and the tail all ready to stuff. You'll need quite a bit of stuffing for this process, because I think for a draft excluder it's much more effective if it's overstuffed rather than under. So you can see me here just inserting little bits into the ends and then pressing it in to make sure it's getting to the corners. And I'm using a whisk, and I also use a knitting needle sometimes. And with every little bit that you push in, it's a good idea to press it in with your hand as well. Keep going and eventually you'll fill up the other side and you'll finish with the middle to stuff. Exactly the same for the other side, just keep putting little bits in, pressing it in out to the seams, using your knitting needle, using your whisk to make sure that it's all in, because once you get to the centre it's more difficult to go back and fill up the sides. Keep going until the stuffing is literally spewing out of the middle, and you'll see why later on when it comes to sewing up. It's exactly the same process for stuffing the other parts of the body. Pack in as much as you can and press it right down to the seams to get as smooth a seam line as you can. You can see here that I've got some jagged edges. This is understuffed. I need to go back in and fill those out. So press the stuffing all the way down to the bits that look understuffed. So here we are, a stuffed bunny head, and the reason it's important to really reinforce those stitches near the ears is because those stitches have to take a lot of pressure, so just check they're all good. If not, you can try to compensate in the sewing up process. So now the head, the body and all the body parts have been stuffed and they're ready to be sewn up. The only body part that isn't stuffed so full is the tail, because I think it's nice that it has a sort of crinkly effect and it's not too perfect a circle, but it's up to you. To sew up the holes you're going to have to master the ladder stitch, and I've included a little picture diagram on the page here so that you can see the order of the stitches. But to start with, make sure you're using a really strong upholstery thread that will be able to stand up to the amount of pulling and tugging that you'll need to do. So you definitely need to begin by securing the thread with a really good knot. And secure that knot a little bit before the stitching ends so that you don't have a weak part at the beginning. And bear in mind that you need to leave an 8mm seam along here. So you need to honour the seam that was already happening on the machine seam. So the straighter you can keep that line and the more you can stick to that 8mm, the better the hole will look when you pull it all together. So you can see all the threads nice and evenly spaced here, and the seam's been left at 8mm. Once you've done a few, you'll then need to start thinking about pulling them up. So you have to work the stuffing and keep pushing it down so it doesn't get caught into the stitching. And here we go, they've been pulled up. It's easier to get the stuffing out of the holes from inside rather than pulling it through the outside. And once you've got that first tightening done, you can keep going with more stitches until you get to the end. And when you get to the end, you need to really keep stuffing to make sure there's not a little dip where you've got that stuff hole. So you want that bit to be just as plump as the rest of the body. So keep stuffing until the end. Keep going and keep going and keep going so that you don't have that dipped concave bit where you've sewn up your hole. And I'm now just securing everything I've just done with some really tight knots with the thread. And you can see me looping through just to create a better knot there. This is on the underside of the draft excluder, so you don't really see this. It's just really good if it's a nice tight strong hole. When it gets to the end, to hide the thread, you go in very close to the knot and you come out a little bit further away, pull it tight and then cut it with the scissors, and the thread jumps onto the inside of the draft excluder. Now all your pieces are constructed and sewn up, it's time to start attaching them to the body. The first thing to do is to place the body against a wall and make sure that top seam is truly vertical and not tilting forwards. From this point, we're now going to think about positioning the head. It's really up to you where the head goes, but I've given you some guidelines, and it's important to remember that you are often viewing the draft excluders from above, so make sure you keep standing up and looking at where and how it sits from a higher level than eye level. So I've got some measurements which will help you position them in the same way as me, but by all means make your own mind up as to where you want the head. I'm just measuring an 11 centimetre distance from the edge, the left edge, so that I can place the centre of the back of the bunny head around that zone. And now I'm marking off a curve onto the body and mirroring it onto the head so that I know where to put my stitches. So you start off with a line of stitches that's closer towards the inside of the head, and then later on we're going to do a line of stitches which is closer to the outside of the head. So I'm attaching it again using upholstery thread, which is really tough and won't snap when you have to pull things up. And it's the same, it's the ladder stitch which I've shown you when you were sewing up the holes. Keep marking on lines that you're going to follow with your chalk so that you keep your stitching nice and tidy and regular. It should look like this underneath, and you can see I've done quite a few ladder stitches now. And once you've done a few, you do have to start pulling the stitches together. You have to start pulling the thread up. Otherwise you end up with so many stitches that you kind of can't get back to the beginning ones. So I've pulled the head towards the body, so this is the first bit of the attachment, and it does kind of get a little bit more difficult now because the head is closer to the body and you're going to have to work underneath it. But I'm marking on using the chalk so that I've got a line to follow when I'm working under there in the darkness. Also marking onto the head when I can so that I know exactly where to put the thread on the head and the body. So I've finished my first circle of stitches to attach the head to the body, and they're fine, but as you can see the head is wobbly. So I'm going to go back in with a second circle of stitches which is further towards the outside of the head, so you'll end up with 2 rings of stitches, and by the end of the second one your head shouldn't be wobbling around like this. To get another line chalked on, you've got to sort of squeeze the bunny head into the body to see where the contact points are going to be, and then get going with your second ring of stitches. Once the head is securely attached, you can see when we try and stand the draft excluder up, it's tilting forward due to the weight of the head, and this is totally normal and to be expected. So we're going to use the lower back foot as a prop to hold the draft excluder in place. Lay the back foot onto its side seam so that it acts as an effective prop, and then measure roughly 9 to 10 centimetres away from that right hand seam to get it into the right position. Chalk on a contact line between the 2 pieces, and then get ready to do as we have for the other parts and do a ladder stitch to connect the foot to the body. The lower back foot is structurally quite important for the draft excluder as it props it up and stops it falling forwards. So it's a really good idea to secure this tightly with a few rings of stitches like we did for the head. If the foot is still wobbling like so, going to have to do some more lines. So squeeze it down into the body and stitch another line of ladder stitches. Now position and mark on the upper back foot. Once you're happy with its positioning, use your chalk, mark on a line and stitch as you did the lower foot. For the arm position, use the measurements written in the instructions to guide you. And then once you're happy with where they're sitting, use your chalk to draw around the curved seam at the top of the arm. The arms are going to be attached slightly differently to the other parts of the body. We want the arm to look like it's coming out from the body, so we're going to attach that curved seam underneath. So we're going to work round the curve and attach it underneath. Do exactly the same for the lower arm, and again your stitches should run underneath that curved seam so it's not visible from the top. Position the tail where you want it and stitch underneath so you don't see the stitches attaching it to the body. You can always go around the back where it's less obvious and do some stitching back there if you need to. Just a little tip here, if your tail keeps wanting to fall forwards or backwards, just create a stitch that's a little lower down and that'll pull it closer towards the body. And that's it, the bunny is complete. Just give him a good check over, check his head, his arms and his feet, and just make sure everything is on securely and holding it up in the upright position. You've made it through all those stages, so well done. You're going to need a massive cup of tea and a good lie down. Thank you so much for downloading my digital product. I hope you enjoyed making it as much as I enjoyed designing it, and please feel free to contact me through the Etsy listing if you get stuck with any parts of the pattern. Bye!